Okay, so this is kind of a weird thing that's happening, but the head of Scientology, David Miscavige, is reportedly missing. He's currently under investigation for child trafficking, and lawyers have tried to serve him 27 times in the last 4 months, but no one knows where he is. The charges come from 3 victims who claim that Miscavige forced them to work on boats as children after they were also forced to sign a $1 billion year contract. In Scientology, they consider you to be an adult at 6 years old. One of the victims also claimed that after her mother left Scientology, the victim was forced to stay in a closet for 48 hours. All of this, of course, also comes after Shelley Miscavige, David's wife, has not been seen since 2007, even though recently it's been reported that she might be living in Big Bear, California.
Scariest medical mistakes that will make you terrified of going to the hospital. After losing her mom to breast and ovarian cancer, 36-year-old Alicia underwent medical testing to find out if she carried the genes for these same cancers. The test results showed that she was extremely likely to develop the same cancers that took her mother's life, so she went in to get her breast, ovaries, and uterus removed. A few weeks later, she went to a different doctor and learned that all the tests were actually negative and she had all those surgeries for nothing. A 73-year-old man named Sherman Sizemore underwent a surgery to find out the cause of his abdominal pain. But unfortunately, he experienced what's called anesthesia awareness, meaning that he felt every bit of pressure and pain that occurred during the first 16 minutes of his operation. Following the procedure, he experienced PTSD from the operation and thought people were trying to bury him alive, eventually causing him to take his own life. Here are some of the scariest fishing videos caught on camera. Part 1. In October of 2012, a fisherman named Dusty Harpool spotted 2 killer whales swimming together in Alaska. They appeared to be circling Dusty's boat, but he soon discovered that they were actually hunting down a nearby mother sea otter and her newborn pup. Unfortunately, the 2 killer whales had already eaten the baby sea otter, but the mother managed to escape by climbing aboard Dusty's boat. The killer whales swam right by while Dusty started the engine to his boat, allowing the mother sea otter to ride away to safety. But after she was safe, the mother otter begins crying out for her lost pup, who she knows will never return.
You're okay.
As you've probably already heard, an arrest has been made in the Idaho stabbing case. But now some really interesting information is coming out about the way the police caught who they believe the killer is. So pretty quickly after the tragedy, police were looking for this white Hyundai Elantra. It was seen near the crime scene as the tragedy was happening, but then it was also caught on a security camera speeding away right afterwards. And what car was found at Brian Kohberger's house in Pennsylvania? A white Hyundai Elantra. But police had been tracking this car for 4 days when they caught Brian. Apparently, Brian's father had flown out to Washington to meet him, and they drove the car home to Pennsylvania together. Up until this point, we didn't know at what point the police believed that Brian was a suspect, but now we know that they had been tracking his trip cross country. And prior to this, police had actually gotten a genealogical DNA hit that matched Brian's DNA to the crime scene. What this basically means is police collected all of the DNA that was found at the crime scene and put it through DNA sequencing that takes a long time, and were able to match most of the DNA to the 4 victims. But there was also DNA there that didn't make any sense. And when it was put through the genealogical sequencing, they got a hit on one of Brian's relatives. Pair that with the fact that when they went to check on him, he was driving the white Elantra cross country to his parents' house, and voila. If you're like me, you are not gonna like this guy by the end of the video. This man was just charged with 83 counts of attempted murder after he tried to take down an entire Alaska Airlines flight. And a reminder that if you have a dark curiosity, you'll love the podcast. So in late October, Joseph Emerson was flying from Washington to San Francisco. And he himself was an off-duty pilot, so they were letting him sit in this jump seat behind the pilots. But then all of a sudden, he got this dazed look in his eyes and he just says, "I'm not okay." And he lunged towards these levers, which are the ones that cut the fuel to the engines. These cut the fuel if there's like a fire on the plane, and also they act as fire extinguishers. But if you pull them in the middle of a flight, you are not gonna have a good time getting down. According to Emerson, he had not slept in the last 40 hours, and he had taken shrooms for the first time ever 48 hours prior to the event. He said he felt like he was in a dream, and pulling the levers was the one thing he could do to wake himself up. And a further investigation showed that he had his hand on the lever and he had pulled it about halfway. Luckily, the pilots and the flight attendants got him away from the levers before anything happened, and you can see where they diverted. But as he was being pulled out of the cockpit, he turned to a flight attendant and said, "You need to cuff me right now or it's gonna get bad." Everyone was fine, and the passengers actually didn't even know what was going on until after the whole thing happened.
Was sentenced to 50 years in prison at the mere age of 16. the truth is more shocking than you could ever imagine. My name is Noah Ney. Beneath a veneer of innocence hid a completely different story. Driven by the desire to join a gang, I was challenged to prove my courage and resolve. With that in mind, I committed an act that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of my life. In a stolen car, I headed to a girl's house, firing through the window and hitting her in the neck and shoulder. Fortunately, she survived, and I had achieved my goal. But my freedom was short-lived. After my arrest, I was placed in a juvenile detention center from which I escaped 3 days later. My escape was fleeting. Captured after 4 days on the run, I found myself back at the center. Refusing to submit to this detention, I began lashing out at the guards. Law enforcement quickly realized they were not dealing with an ordinary teenager, and an exceptional measure was imposed. I was tried as an adult and sentenced accordingly. So, do you think my sentence was fair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. I'm the youngest serial killer in the United States. I am Daniel LaPlante, and my name is etched in the criminal history of Massachusetts and the country. As a child, I was the outsider, the one other kids couldn't understand, the one who found solace in the silent world of insects. But this fascination took a dark turn, a path that led me to commit the unimaginable. It was in 1987, on a cold, starless night, when I entered Priscilla's home. She was sleeping, innocent, with an unborn child nestled inside her. I acted noiselessly, guided by impulses that even I didn't fully understand. What I did to Priscilla that night was more than a crime. It was an act of pure cruelty. Even after she stopped struggling, I couldn't stop. The blows fell, one after another, until silence returned. But the silence was shattered by the screams of her children, screams that only fueled the darkness within me. What I did next is a story that has haunted the nights of this small town for years. If you want to know how that horrific night ended for the unfortunate children in the next room, subscribe, like, and comment part 2. The continuation of my tale is even more shocking, and I am ready to share everything. Brace yourselves for the worst.
After pleading guilty to torturing their foster son, this couple's lawyer stated that it was simply due to the fact that they didn't have much parenting experience. Nicholas and Mackenzie Spencer are a married couple in their 30s from South Carolina. They had been living in Uganda after moving there in 2017 on humanitarian work. However, it turns out the couple have a disgustingly dark side. 5 years ago, they fostered 3 children from a Christian ministry. Sickeningly, they were arrested in December 2022 on charges of aggravated torture. According to police statements, the couple allegedly kept their 10-year-old foster son barefoot and naked throughout the day. They're accused of forcing the child to squat in an awkward position and making him sleep on a wooden plank without a mattress or bedding. They're believed to have had a camera monitoring him constantly and apparently kept him confined to a small room. This allegedly went on for 2 years. Shockingly, after the couple pleaded guilty, they were ordered to pay a $28,000 fine. The pair were also later charged with aggravated child trafficking and have been out on bail since pleading guilty. They spent a short time in prison, and it's reported that if they are able to pay this fine, they may not have to spend a single day longer. The couple's lawyer claimed that they weren't able to look after the child properly due to having no parenting experience. The poor child has been placed into a children's home. Another disturbing development in the case of the hundreds of bodies found rotting in a funeral home. If you haven't seen my previous video on this, the remains of nearly 200 people have been found at a funeral home in Penrose recently. The discovery was made after it was reported that there was an abhorrent smell coming from the building. The process has begun of identifying all of the bodies there, much to the distress of the loved ones. There are now some disturbing reports of worrying allegations. Now, many people were querying in the comment section of my original video on this case of how on earth did the families not know about this? Presumably, once a person receives a burial or a cremation, the family kind of knows what's happened to that person. They are either physically buried and the family can see that happening, or they receive the ashes. Now, a family member of one of the people who was being looked after by the funeral home believes that she was given fake ashes of her mother. The lady, reportedly named as Tanya Wilson, stated, "My mum's last wish was for her remains to be scattered in a place she loved, not rotting away in a building." Tanya and other families were allegedly given death certificates by the funeral home, which named crematoriums that had handled their loved ones. However, some reports state that the crematoriums didn't actually perform the cremations for the funeral home on the dates provided. A potential criminal investigation is still underway. A man rang police to admit to hiding his dead son's body in a freezer, and when police arrived and couldn't find it, they just left. After 11 a.m. on the 29th of October, police got a disturbing phone call. This was about a deceased person found in Bradford Drive in Huntsville, Alabama. Police attended the property and found the decomposed body of 19-year-old Logan Michael Halstead in a freezer outside. But this isn't the first time that police had been to the house. The new owners had bought the property in September and were in the process of cleaning it out to move in when they made the grim discovery. Now, the body is believed to have been in that freezer since August. It was at this point that police questioned the previous occupants couple, Michael and Karen Halstead. The victim is thought to be their son, and the pair have been charged with 1 count of abuse of a corpse. Disturbingly, the pair actually have 2 other children, twin boys, who are being looked after by professionals. Logan was reportedly disabled before his tragic death. An autopsy is currently being carried out, and dependent on the results, the parents may then be charged with murder. When questioned, Michael actually made a shocking revelation. Firstly, Michael stated that his wife Karen was unaware of this crime. It's alleged that Michael tried to hide Logan's body and wrapped him in blankets, plastic, and covered him in cardboard. The second shocking revelation is the fact that Michael stated he even called the police on the 11th of October and told them that he had hidden Logan's body. However, it seemed that he did such a good job of hiding the body that police were unable to find it. It's reported by multiple sources that police turned up, looked for it, but after being unsuccessful, they simply left.
This is Ghost Rider, one of the most gut-turning cartel execution videos explained. This is an infamous cartel execution video, and I don't recommend searching for it because it's definitely one of the worst. It took place in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured for 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. They then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is completely covered in flames, and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members just laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day, or a couple days later. And Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically just a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. Apparently, the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is absolutely horrible and extremely gruesome. And it's in the same category as some of the worst videos like Funky Town, 3 Guys 1 Hammer, and much more. Whatever you do, don't go searching for this video because I guarantee you will regret it.
This is one missing persons case that haunts me. So right now you're looking at Roxanne Paltoff, and she's been missing from Texas since the year 2006. So to everybody that knew her, Roxanne was a very normal girl. She was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and she was only 18 years old when she went missing. So on the night of July 7th, 2006, Roxanne was staying right here at the Budget Inn in Austin, Texas. Now, according to everything that we know about this case, on that evening, Roxanne had a heated argument with her then boyfriend while she was in her motel room. People actually saw Lewis Walls, her boyfriend, there with her that night, and yes, they heard the argument through the walls. So after arguing with Lewis for a while, Roxanne eventually left the hotel room, only carrying her ID. And that was the last time she would ever be seen. Not only alive, but just seen in general. Nobody knows where she is. Suspiciously, all of Roxanne's personal items were left in the motel room. That includes her shoes, purse, wallet, cell phone, etc. And the call logs from Lewis's phone that evening are very suspicious. So after Roxanne went missing, Lewis placed over 300 different phone calls to different people that he knew. That included a phone call to an ex-girlfriend of his. And he told his ex-girlfriend that he was in a lot of trouble, but no one has ever figured out what the trouble he was alluding to really was. Now, in a weird twist, Roxanne's ID card was actually found in another man's wallet. The man with Roxanne's identification was not her boyfriend. He was a completely unrelated dude, but a few days after Roxanne went missing, he was accused of assaulting an exotic dancer. But those charges were eventually dropped as well. To this day, nobody has ever been able to locate Roxanne's body. They haven't heard from her. They have no idea what happened to her. It's almost as if she just vanished from that hotel room. And authorities in Texas are still looking for her. So if you've seen this woman and you have any tips, I highly urge you submit a tip to one of those lines listed above.
This kid hammered his parents to death just so he could throw a party. On July 16th, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley, who was on the right, bludgeoned his parents to death, put their bodies in the master bedroom, and then threw a massive party at his house. Shortly before 5 in the evening that day, the Florida-based high school student took his parents' cell phone. He then took 3 ecstasy pills and went to stand behind his mother while she was working on the family computer. He then beat her with a hammer again and again until she was dead. After hearing the mother's screams, Tyler's father rushed from the bedroom to the scene. Tyler and his dad then stared at each other for several moments before he did the same thing to his father. He spent 3 hours cleaning up the bloody mess, hid their bodies in the master bedroom, and then got ready to throw the party of his life. After murdering his parents, Tyler sent several Facebook messages to his friends, inviting them to his party. Since he had been grounded for days before this, his friends expressed concerns about whether or not his parents would let him have the party. And to that, Tyler said that they won't be home, and when they asked him about the possibility of them showing up during the party, he coldly replied, "They won't trust me." After this, he stopped at an ATM and then picked up some of his friends. Around 60 people came to his house, playing beer pong, drinking alcohol, smoking cigars. That night, Tyler told Michael Mandel, his best friend, that he had bludgeoned his parents to death with a claw hammer. He then took Michael to the master bedroom and showed him the bodies of his dead parents. After processing what Tyler had just told him and what he had just seen, Michael took this selfie, which is now completely infamous, thinking that he would never see his best friend again. Soon, the news of the crime spread and Tyler was arrested the next morning. As a teen, Tyler was disturbed and had mental health issues. And his parents tried to help him by taking him to psychiatric help and mental health programs. Tyler had also committed crimes such as arson in the past and expressed a desire to die. In 2014, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for what he did. This case is absolutely sickening, and I can't imagine why or how somebody can do this to their own parents.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is one of England's most disturbed men, Robert Napper, a serial killer and pedophile. Robert Napper was born in 1966 and he had a very troubled childhood. He often witnessed his dad beat his mom and his parents divorced when he was only 9 years old. When he was 13 years old, his personality completely changed after Robert was assaulted by a family friend on a camping trip. He became introverted, obsessively tidy, and reclusive, and was also known to spy on his sister naked while she was in the bathroom. So apparently in 1986, Robert's own mother called into the police and reported that her son had sexually assaulted a woman. Apparently, he had raped a 30-year-old woman in front of her children and had gotten away with it, but admitted the crime to his mother. So eventually, Robert Napper was suspected of being the Green Chain Rapist, a serial rapist who committed over 70 crimes against women in a 4-year span. And something disgusting about Robert is that he would pick women to assault who had their kids with them. One woman in particular, for example, was wheeling her 2-year-old child in a baby carriage when Robert viciously raped her. But eventually, Robert would need to feed the bloodlust that was brewing inside of him. So on July 15, 1992, Robert went on the hunt. He visited the Wimbledon Common, a large open green area in South London, and he came across young mother Rachel Nichol right here, who was with her 2-year-old son Alex. When Robert came across the pair, he stabbed Rachel 49 times in front of her own son, and left her to die there alone in the forest with her son. So when the authorities came and found Rachel's body, apparently her son Alex was still clinging to her corpse, begging his mom to wake up. But it wouldn't be long before Robert would strike again. In November of 1993, Robert broke into the home of Samantha Bissett and stabbed her in the neck and chest, killing her instantly. He then proceeded to sexually assault her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine, who had just watched her own mother get murdered, and then he smothered Jasmine to death with a pillow. After killing Samantha, he dragged her out into the living room and dismembered her body, and even took parts of her corpse home with him as trophies. Apparently, the crime scene photographer that was tasked with photographing this horrific scene was forced to take a 2-year leave from their job because it was so gruesome. Thankfully, though, Robert couldn't escape justice for long, and he was arrested the next year and charged with those crimes. However, it would be almost 12 years before he was finally found to be the killer of Rachel Nichol. Another man named Colin had actually been prosecuted already, though, for the murder of Rachel, and it wasn't until 2004 when that man was exonerated and it was revealed that Robert was the guy who had killed her in the forest on that day. So eventually, Robert was convicted of the murders, and he's now in prison for an indefinite amount of time. And even though some of the sexual assaults remain unsolved, the police say that it's more than likely Robert who carried all of these out. If you want to listen to more true crime stories like this, check out the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.
This is One Man, One Ice Pick, one of the most messed up and sickening videos on the internet explained. The video that I'm about to explain is 11 minutes long, and I beg you to never look it up. On the left is Luca Magnotta, and on the right is Jung Lin. As the video begins, Jung Lin, the victim, is seen naked and tied to a bed with a blindfold on, while the killer Luca Magnotta is standing over him. The song True Faith by New Order is playing, and this video completely ruined the song for me. The video then jump cuts to Jung Lin lying motionless on the bed, and a bedsheet is placed over his head. Luca then enters the camera holding an ice pick and begins stabbing the victim repeatedly in the chest and stomach for over 1 minute straight. Luca then grabs the camera and holds it as a POV shot and shows all the stab wounds around the victim's body. There's no blood at all, which somewhat feels more unsettling, and this is because the victim's throat was slit off camera. We know this because Luca lifts the bedsheet from the victim's head. Still shooting in a POV style, Luca takes a kitchen knife and begins slicing into the victim's flesh on his right thigh and right arm. Luca then focuses the camera on Jung Lin's body, showing the full extent and brutality of the situation. The video then jump cuts again and shows the victim's head, which at this point has been severed. Luca places the head in a black box and plays with the severed head's hair for a couple seconds. Once again, the video jump cuts and Luca has the camera in one hand and the knife in the other. He starts to cut off one of the victim's arms at the shoulder, beginning the process of dismembering the victim's limbs. Luca cuts into the flesh for a while until the arm is half dismembered. He then drags the knife along the victim's back, causing severely deep slashes. Another jump cut happens, and at this point we see both of the victim's arms have been completely dismembered. Luca then picks up one of the severed arms and begins using the hand to pleasure himself. This is absolutely sick. At this point we get another jump cut and the victim's right leg is completely dismembered, and the left leg has been half dismembered. A close-up is then shown of the victim's stump, and you see his femur bone surrounded by flesh. The body is then turned over on its side, lying on its stomach. Luca then starts humping Jung Lin's body. Again, another jump cut happens and it shows Luca cutting off a piece of the victim's butt with a fork and knife. It's not shown on camera, but he 100% eats it. Luca then takes a small puppy who I assume has been starved and places it next to Jung Lin's body, and it then begins eating his right leg stump. Finally, the video jump cuts again, showing Luca pleasuring himself with one of the victim's severed arms, and the video then concludes. This whole video and case is absolutely sickening, And it's a very hard one to wrap your head around. There's also a Netflix documentary called Don't F With Cats that explains this whole case. I beg you to never go searching for this video because you will regret it.
The story of this American female serial killer will make your hair stand up. As if her crimes are not horrific enough, she earned the nickname the Giggling Granny. How creepy is that? Nanny Doss was raised on a farm by a very controlling father, and one of the few joys that she had in life was sneaking into her mother's room and reading her romance novels, and she would daydream about the day that she'd be swept off her feet and have her happily ever after. And she got married to her first husband at the age of 16, and it was a miserable marriage. The couple had 4 daughters together, 2 of which mysteriously died of food poisoning, at which point the husband took one remaining daughter and fled because he was scared to death of Nanny. The remaining infant baby named Florine was left with Nanny, and Nanny picked up and married somebody new. Now this man was an alcoholic, but despite that, they were married 16 years and raised Florine together. This is where the bloodbath really begins. Nanny was in the room right after her daughter Melvina had given birth to her second grandchild, and while Melvina was still loopy from the labor drugs and she was exhausted, she could have sworn that she saw Nanny stick a hat pin in the baby's head. Melvina kind of passed out and went back to sleep, but when she came to, she started asking her family members, did Nanny have a hat pin and stick the baby in the head? And the family regretted to inform Melvina that the baby had in fact died, and yes, they did see Nanny holding a hat pin. However, the doctors couldn't give a positive explanation for the baby's death. The death of the baby absolutely shattered Melvina and her husband, and they started fighting and drifting apart, and Melvina started dating a soldier named Robert, who Nanny did not approve of. And one night when Melvina was out of the house and Robert was left alone with Nanny, Robert mysteriously died, and Nanny received $500 in life insurance that she had taken out on Robert a couple weeks earlier. Not long after that, Nanny's husband forced himself on her, and she didn't like that, so she put rat poison in his corn whiskey jar, and he died that night. Nanny married her third husband only 3 days after meeting him, and he died shortly after this of heart failure. She picked up some life insurance, bought some land, and built a new house. Her late third husband left behind a mother and a bedridden sister who also died shortly after. At this point, Nanny burned the house down, took that life insurance money, and moved on. Then Nanny landed a fourth husband, and at this point her mom moved in with him. She found out that her husband was cheating, so she poisoned him to death, and for good measure, she poisoned her mom to death too. Then she married her a fifth man named Samuel Doss, who was very disapproving of the romance novels that she loved to read. He went to the hospital one night with flu-like symptoms and was diagnosed with a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and sent home. And a few days later, he showed up dead. The doctors were very suspicious of this, so they did an autopsy and found enough arsenic in his system to kill 20 men. Nanny was arrested shortly after this and confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother-in-law, her mother, her sister-in-law, and yes, sadly, even the baby with the hat pin. I spent a weekend with one of the most notorious killers in Texas. So in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in South Texas in women's prisons units helping people find forgiveness and second chances at life. And on this one particular weekend, when we arrived, the correctional officers informed our team that there was a new inmate on the premises. She was only 17 years old and had been tried and convicted as an adult for a very violent crime. And because I was the youngest person on our prison team, they voted me to be the one to work with her because she was young, I was young, and she might relate to me and open up to me. Now, I had a rule for myself when I worked with these women to never look up their crimes. I didn't want it to affect my judgment about them or to affect my willingness to help them, so that was just a rule that I always kept. So the correctional officers, they walked me down this long corridor into a classroom where sitting at the table was Erin Caffey. Now, Erin Caffey is a tiny thing. Now, I'm a tiny person, and I dwarfed her. She's very small, very timid, very soft-spoken, rarely will look you in the eye. And my first thought whenever I lay eyes on her and I sit down across from her is, how can somebody this small and this timid possibly be convicted as an adult for a violent crime? What violence is she possibly capable of? Little did I know. We started talking, and we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit, cracked a few jokes. I tried to get her to lighten up, and eventually she did start kind of opening up to me, and she started volunteering some details about her version of what had happened the night of her crime. And I have to admit, even though I had a rule to really try not to know what people had done, I was very curious because, again, here's this tiny little thing. She's 17 years old, looks scared to death, and she's in this facility. And well, her version of the events that took place the night of the crime led me to believe that she was a victim in all of it and that it was really out of her hands. She couldn't stop it, and she's haunted by it, regrets it every day of her life, and she just wishes she could take it all back. And y'all, she was so convincing, just absolutely convincing, that I truly believed that she was innocent. She had somehow gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, was wrongly convicted. And I started brainstorming in my head, like, how can I raise awareness about this and help her get out? Little did I know, in my naivety, that this young lady was a psychopath. She was very cunning, very manipulative, and the small, mousy, timid, soft-spoken thing was very much a calculated tactic to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And my time with her started a long season of my life of panic attacks and nightmares, and I'm going to tell you more about that in part 2.